Uh, oh, we got a message that it's being recorded. We're fine with that. I got a message from the one who organizes the tournament that it's a good idea to have gallery view when the speeches are not being made, but if there's a speech, meaning opening argument or closing argument, then you go ahead and have speaker view. So I think that's about all we need to get started. I would like to begin by asking the attorneys for this matter to make their appearances in the case of Ethel Marks versus Sonny's Rooftop Bar. Appearances, please, starting with the plaintiff.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Yashita Keswani. Today I'm joined with my co-counsel, Mr. Kayeyo Burgess.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Today we represent the plaintiff in today's case, Ms. Ethel Marks.
Thank you. And could we have an appearance by the defense counsel, please?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Owen Stone, and I represent the defendant, Sonny's Rooftop Bar, alongside my co-counsel, Caleb Kopitsky, and Mr. Sonny Madden.
All right, fine, thank you. And does the second chair care to make an appearance? All right, we will go ahead and get started then. Are there any preliminary matters by Ms. Keswani or Mr. Stone? Let's start with, and now am I pronouncing your name right, Ms. Keswani?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, good. So Ms. Keswani, do you have any preliminary matters for the court to consider at this time?
Yes, Your Honor. Due to the virtual nature of this trial, I just want to ask you a few of your preferences. Would you like us to object and then wait to state our basis, or object and then state our basis immediately?
Object and state your basis.
And Your Honor, we also do plan to share some exhibits and demonstratives throughout today's trial. Would you like us to ask to screen share them or simply let the record reflect?
Just go ahead and share the screen whenever you're going to use an exhibit.
Thank you, Your Honor. With that, the plaintiff is ready to proceed.
All right, good. And Mr. Stone, do you have any preliminary matters for the court to consider at this time?
Yes, Your Honor, two brief preliminary matters. First, we ask that pursuant to Rule 603, all witnesses be constructively sworn in.
That will be granted.
And second, Your Honor, pursuant to Rule 615, we ask that all witnesses, aside from party representatives, be sequestered.
I will grant that matter as well, that request as well. All right, given that, I think we're ready to begin with opening statements. I will, I'm going to switch to speaker view at this time, and I'd ask Ms. Keswani to go ahead with her presentation.
They kept serving despite the signs. Members of the jury, today's case is about a friend, a daughter, and most importantly, a college student with a promising future. Now, today, you're gonna hear that after going to the defendant's bar and after being served drink after drink after drink after drink, her car, it swerved and it fell into a ravine and she died. Members of the jury, when she was at the defendant's bar, she was with her best friend for spring break, Mr. Morgan Levin. That night, they chose to go to the defendant's bar, but that's when the trouble began. You see, at that bar, the defendant, Sonny's Rooftop Bar, served Miss Jessica Marks drink after drink after drink, even after she was obviously intoxicated. Now, that's why we're here today. Today, the plaintiff in today's case, Miss Ethel Marks, Jessica Marks's mother, is suing the defendant for the wrongful death of Jessica Marks. Because under the California Dram Shop Act, if bartenders continue to serve someone after they're obviously intoxicated or show the symptoms of obviously intoxication, they're liable for their death. Now today, as a plaintiff, we must prove to you by a preponderance of evidence, meaning more likely than not, that Sonny's Rooftop Bar is liable. We will prove this in today's case. Now, there's three main pieces of evidence I want you to keep in mind as we go through today's trial. One, how many times did Jessica Marks and the bartenders at Sunny's rooftop bar interact? Two, how was Jessica behaving that night? And three, how did the staff at Sunny's rooftop bar react to that behavior? I want to go through those one by one. One, how many times did Jessica Marks and Sunny's rooftop bar interact? Members of the jury, today you're going to hear that they interacted a minimum of 8 times. Every time Sunny went to the table, every time Sunny took their order, every time Sunny and Jessica talked to each other. Sue, how was Jessica behaving that night? You're going to hear today that as the night went on, Jessica got more and more drunk as she was served more drinks. You're going to hear that she got louder than usual. She was slurring her words. She wasn't making sense. And three, how did Sunny's rooftop bar react to Jessica's behavior? Members of the jury, today you're going to hear that after seeing how Jessica was behaving at the bar, Sunny's rooftop bar, they did nothing. They continued to serve Jessica alcohol. They continued to serve her after she was obviously intoxicated. Members of the jury, that's why at the end of this trial, I'm going to ask you to come to the only conclusion possible. That Sunny's rooftop bar is liable. Because they, despite the signs, they kept serving Jessica alcohol. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Keswani. Mr. Stone, would you like to make an opening statement at this time?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, you may proceed.
Good morning, Your Honor. Members of the jury, my name is Owen Stone and I represent the defendant, Sunny's Rooftop Bar, in today's case. 5 moments. In today's case, there are only 5 moments that matter. When the defendant served Jessica Marks. The plaintiff asked you to listen to how many times they interacted that night. But how many times they interacted does not matter. What matters is how many times the defendant served Jessica. 5 moments. Now that's not just what I'm saying, that's what the law says. Because the law that the plaintiff filed the suit under is the Dram Shop Act. And while they failed to mention a burden of proof, their burden is by a preponderance of the evidence, which means they need to prove to you more likely than not that Jessica was an obviously intoxicated minor who was served alcohol. But the law is more specific than that. Because it says when a bar has a duty to check if someone's obviously intoxicated, to cut someone off. And while the plaintiff claimed that the Dram Shop Act says if they serve after seeing any symptoms, that's incorrect. Because it's not after taking orders. It's not after cleaning up drinks. It's not when talking to anyone. The only time the Dram Shop Act is in effect is when the defendant served drinks. In fact, you can see the law here. We'd like to show you the exact wording that the court will give to you at the end of today's case. You can see clearly in red when the defendant served Jessica Marks alcohol. No other time applies. Now, this is important because you'll hear from Mr. Morgan Levin today that there were only 5 times, 5 moments when the defendant served Jessica Marks. He'll tell you that these interactions were incredibly short. And most importantly, he'll tell you that he doesn't have any specific recollection of what was happening in those 5 moments. He won't be able to tell you what Jessica was saying, how she was acting, what she was doing. Members of the jury, I'd like you to compare that with what my client, Mr. Sonny Meadow, will tell you. Mr. Sonny Meadow will tell you that he's trained in identifying symptoms of obvious intoxication, and that yes, there were 5 moments, and he didn't identify a single symptom. He looked every time, but he didn't see any symptoms. Now, once again, the plaintiff failed to mention their burden, but they have to prove to you by preponderance the evidence that Jessica was obviously intoxicated in those 5 moments. We believe that by the end of today's case, they won't have brought up any specific evidence from those 5 moments. There'll have been 2 witnesses. There'll have been 5 moments and 0 evidence. Now, in addition, as the defense, we've brought an affirmative defense of comparative negligence. That means that we have a burden in today's case. Our burden is to prove by preponderance of the evidence that Jessica's own negligent actions contributed to her death. We understand that this is difficult to talk about. We don't believe that Jessica deserved to die, and we aren't saying she was a bad person. But what we're saying, and what the law is saying, is that Jessica took needlessly risky actions that night, and that those actions are what contributed to her death. And at the end of today's case, after you've listened to all the evidence, listened to the choices that Jessica made, we believe that you'll see that Jessica's choices, in addition to the 5 moments that the plaintiff cannot prove, will return a verdict of not liable. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. Now at this time, Ms. Keswani, would you please call your witness to the stand?
Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to call Mr. Morgan Levin to the stand at this time.
And Mr. Levin, having been constructively sworn.
Apologies, Your Honor. If you could pause for 1 second. I believe my headphone has just died and I can't hear anything.
Okay, sure.
Now I can hear. I apologize.
All right, good. Now, we were at the point of Ms. Keswani calling Mr. Levin to the stand, and we are going to assume that he has been sworn and allow Ms. Keswani to begin her examination. Please proceed.
Good afternoon. Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
Hi, my name's Morgan Levin. I'm a college student at UCLA.
Mr. Levin, do you know someone named Jessica Marks?
I do. I've known Jess since we were 12. We've been best friends ever since.
Mr. Levin, why are you here today?
I'm actually here because of Jess. She got into a car accident and passed away a couple years ago.
When did that accident occur?
That was March 24th, 2019.
Mr. Levin, I want to break down the events of that day. Where were you that night?
Jess and we went to this bar in Malibu. It was right along the beach, Sunny's Rooftop Bar.
What time did you get to Sunny's Rooftop Bar?
Got there around 9 o'clock that night.
What did you do at Sunny's Rooftop Bar?
We sat down, ordered a couple of drinks.
Who was serving you these drinks?
It was the owner of the bar. He said his name was Sunny.
How many times would you say you interacted with Sunny that night?
Well, Sunny was up on the patio, the rooftop, talking with other customers that whole night, but he probably came to our table 8 or 10 times.
Now, you mentioned that you ordered some drinks that night. Did you take any pictures of the drinks that you ordered?
I did. I was documenting them for a review of the restaurant I was going to do.
Let the record reflect my co-counsel is now screen sharing exhibits 11 through 16. Mr. Levin, what do you see on the screen?
I'd say these are the photos I took of the table and of Jess that night.
And is this an accurate representation of those pictures that you took?
Yeah, they all look to be.
Your Honor, permission to enter exhibits 11 through 16 into evidence at this time.
Any objection by Mr. Stone?
No objection, Your Honor.
Those exhibits will be moved into evidence. Please proceed.
Mr. Levin, I want to focus on 3 of those pictures, exhibit 11, 14, and 16. I'll let the record reflect my co-counsel is now screen sharing those. Now, Mr. Levin, who is that sitting on the other side of the table?
That's Jess.
And is that Jessica in all of the pictures?
That's right.
In that first picture, what is Jessica holding?
She's got a glass of wine in her hand.
And how many glasses of wine do you see Jessica drink that night?
Well, in that photo, she just has the one, but she probably had about 3 that night.
I want to focus on that second picture. What drinks from that table did Jessica have?
She had those 2 seltzers, hard seltzers on the right. It's that orange and white can.
Now, that third picture, what drinks from that did Jessica have?
She had another hard seltzer, that White Claw, orange and white can.
Is there any drink that you saw Jessica have that isn't pictured in the pictures below?
Yeah, she also had a shot later in the night.
Now, Mr. Levin, I want to talk about Jessica's behavior after she was served these drinks that night. What was Jessica behaving like?
I mean, she was slurring her words. Her eyes were watery and red. I thought she was drunk.
Did you take any videos of her acting that way that night?
I did. Jess gave me her phone. She wanted to film a video of us at the bar that night.
Let the record reflect my co-counsel is screen sharing Exhibit 10. Mr. Levin, do you recognize the freeze frame of this video?
Yeah, this is the video I took of Jess that night.
About how long was that video that you took?
30 or 40 seconds.
Your Honor, permission to enter Exhibit 10 into evidence at this time.
Hearing no objection by the defense, the exhibit will be entered.
Yes, Your Honor, we'd like to object.
All right. What's your-
Pursuant to rule, yes, Your Honor. Pursuant to Rule 801, we believe that the nonverbal conduct in this video is consistent of inadmissible hearsay.
Overruled. Proceed.
Now, Your Honor, permission to play this video for the benefit of the jury.
Yes.
Hi everyone, Morgan and I are in Hollywood. We're at a bar. It's kind of like a Philly bar, except everything is really, really expensive. $10 for a seltzer. And everyone here wants to be a model or an actress. I'd like to thank the Academy. Mom and Dad, you've inspired me. Okay, well, go big or go home.
Now, Mr. Levin, did you watch that video in its entirety?
I did.
Is that how Jessica was behaving throughout that night?
Yeah, that's how she was acting that entire night.
Objection, Your Honor, pursuant to Rule 602. May I be heard?
Yes. Please explain.
Yes, Your Honor. The witness just said that that was how Jessica was acting the entire night. Your Honor, the witness hasn't laid foundation that they were with Jessica the entire night. And in addition, to testify to that, they would have to have personal knowledge of what Jessica was actually, the state of mind of Jessica, which again requires personal knowledge that the witness does not have.
Your
All
Honor,
right. Go ahead.
Your Honor, this witness is simply testifying on their rationally based perception. They testify that after being served these drinks, that's how Jessica was testifying, and they're able to testify about that because they were with Jessica and able to observe her behavior. They don't need to know about her mental state of mind to see that she was slurring her words or acting louder than usual or even not making sense. That's behavior that can be observed, Your Honor.
All right. Overruled on the basis of state of mind, sustained as to foundation. You may lay foundation with regard to Mr. Levin's observation of Jessica and whether or not it was firsthand and
Your Honor.
how long he observed her. Go ahead.
At this time, we ask that answer be stricken from the record then.
It will be stricken subject to further foundation. So you may lay the foundation and re-ask the question, Ms. Keswani.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Levin, were you able to observe Jessica's behavior that night?
Yeah, I mean, I was sitting with her most of that night.
And the behavior you saw in the video, is that how she was behaving when she was with you?
Right, from what I saw, that's just how Miss Jess was acting.
Now, I want to put those pictures and that video on a timeline. Let the record reflect my co-counsel is screen sharing a demonstrative aid. Mr. Levin, when were those pictures taken?
The first photo was taken at 9:10. The next photo, I think, was 9:16. And then it was 9:42, 10:18, 10:57, and then 11:32.
Now, that video of Jessica, when was that video taken?
Well, That was taken in between those last two photos, in between 10:57 and 11:32.
How do you know that video was taken then?
Well, we ordered some chips and guac. And if you look at the photo I took at 10:57, you can see it's on the table. And then when I took that video of Jess, it's on the table there. But by 10:32, it's gone.
Mr. Levin, I want to focus on the end of the night. While you were leaving,
A question for clarification. Do you mean by 11:32 it was gone?
Yes, Your Honor, that's right.
All right, please proceed.
Mr. Levin, I want to talk about the end of the night. Did the bartenders at Sunny's bar ever make any comments about how Jessica was behaving?
Yeah. Jess and I were walking inside, and to go inside, you kind of have to walk down these stairs. And I remember Jess kind of stumbled and ran into Sunny. And Sunny goes, "Oh, we might need to cut this one off."
Did they cut Jessica off after making that comment?
No.
Now, what time did you leave the bar that night?
Remember, we signed the check around 10:40. We were out of there by 10:45.
What happened after you left the bar?
Well, I got in my Uber, but Jess insisted on driving.
What happened after that?
Well, I remember sitting in the back seat of the Uber, and Jess was driving in front of us, and she started veering to the left.
Mr. Levin, what did you see happened after Miss Marks was veering to the left?
She crossed those two lines in the road, and I remember thinking she's going to straighten it out, but she just kept going further and further to the left.
What happened after that?
There was this awful noise, the sound of metal crumpling. I looked over, and she was gone. Her car was flipped over.
Thank you, Mr. Levin. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Keswani. Mr. Stone, would you like to examine?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may begin.
Mr. Levin, I'd like to begin by discussing your interactions with with the bartenders that night. You would say you were served by Sunny Mehta about 5 times that night, right?
Right, 4 or 5 times. He was at our table 8 or 10 times.
But 4 or 5 were being served.
That's right.
Right. And in those about 5 moments, they were short interactions, right?
30 seconds to a minute. That's right.
Right. And that was on the longer end, right?
Sure, anywhere between 30 and 60 seconds. That's about how long it takes to take our order.
To serve you drinks, right?
Take the order, pardon me, yeah, serve the drinks.
Right. And you don't remember specifically how Jessica was acting in those 5 moments, do you?
I remember she was pretty drunk throughout that entire night, but I couldn't tell you specifically which drink was ordered when and how she was acting.
Right. You couldn't tell me how she sounded in those 5 moments, right?
No, not specifically in those moments, just generally about that night.
You can't tell me what she was saying in those 5 moments, right?
No, I don't remember that.
You can't say specifically how she acted in those 5 moments, can you?
Again, I know how Jess was acting that night, but I couldn't tell you specifically in each of those moments.
All right. Now, you just a few minutes ago watched a video, correct?
Yeah, it was a video that I took.
Yeah. And you'd recognize that video, right?
Yeah, I just saw it.
Your Honor, let the record reflect we're showing a screenshot from Exhibit 10, which has already been entered.
All right.
Now this is that depiction of the video, right?
That's right.
All right. I'd like to go through the drinks that we see in this. In this picture, there's a glass of wine, an open White Claw, a full draft beer, and then maybe the IPA can behind that draft beer in blue, right?
That looks right. That's correct.
All right. And you claim that this was taken around 11 p.m., right?
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Well, I'd like to show you a picture from around 11. Let the record reflect we're now showing a picture, Exhibit 15. Now I'd like to go through the drinks. I'd like to show you the drinks from this picture. In this picture, there's the glass of wine, 2 White Claws, the draft beer is empty, and there's a mixed drink on the table, right?
That's right.
All right. And you claim that this was taken, and this was taken around 11, right?
10:57, I think.
Mm-hmm. Now, just to be clear, this picture taken at 10:57 and the video you claim was taken right around 11, there are some major inconsistencies in the drinks on the table, right?
I mean, there's different drinks on the table if that's what you're asking.
All right. Well, I'd like to show you some pictures from earlier that night. Let the record reflect we're now showing Exhibit 13. Now, Mr. Levin, in this picture, there's a glass of wine, a White Claw, and 1 IPA can, right?
That's what's on the table. That's right.
Mm-hmm. And this was taken at 9:42 p.m., right?
That's right.
All right. Now, Mr. Levin, I'd like to show you one final picture. Let the record reflect we're now showing Exhibit 14. Now, Mr. Levin, in this photo, there's everything from the last picture, right?
Sorry, which photo you're referring to?
Exhibit 13. There's a glass of wine, 1 can of White Claw, and 1 IPA can in this picture as well, right?
Yes, with some additional drinks.
Right. There's also the full draft beer, isn't there?
That's right.
And then there's also the extra White Claw and mixed drink, isn't there?
There are 2 White Claws and that drink in a mug.
Yes. And this was taken at 10:18 p.m., right?
That's right.
Now, Mr. Levin, out of all these pictures, this photo from 10:18 is the only one that has all of the same drinks in it as the Exhibit 10, right?
Sure.
And so, Mr. Levin, isn't it more accurate to say that this video was probably recorded around 10 p.m. that night?
No, I remember when that video was taken. It was around 11 o'clock.
But just to be clear, there are inconsistencies between the picture from 11 o'clock and this video, right?
There are different drinks in each of the photos, if that's what you're asking.
All right. You can take that down now, Mr. Kopitsky. Now, Mr. Levin, I'd like to talk to you about your interactions with the police. Now, you called the police once Jessica crashed, right?
I did. When I saw her off the side of the road, that was the first thing I did.
And you spoke to the police, right?
I did.
And you knew you were speaking to the police, right?
That's right.
And I'd like to show you the police statement from that night. Your Honor, let the record reflect we're showing Exhibit 23, which has been pre-admitted.
All right.
Please read along silently while I read aloud the lines highlighted in yellow. I asked Levin how many drinks Levin and Jessica had at Sunny's. Levin said Levin and Jessica had not had any drinks as they were not 21. I read that correctly, right?
That's right. That's right.
And that's not true, is it?
I didn't want to get in any sort of trouble at the time. I just wanted my friend to be safe.
Right, but you amended your statement, didn't you?
That's right. When I understood this was a lawsuit, I told the truth.
Right. I'd like to show you your amended statement. If you could please highlight the lines in green, Mr. Kopitsky. Thank you. In green, please read along silently while I read aloud. Levin acknowledged that Marks had a few drinks and that Levin had a few also. When I asked what Levin meant by a few, Levin said, I don't know, 3. I read that correctly, didn't I?
That's right.
And just to be clear, that's also not completely true, is it?
Well, Miss Jess had more than 3 drinks, but I had about 3.
Right, you had 3 at the bar, didn't you?
That's right.
But you also had 1 at Jessica's Airbnb before you left, didn't you?
Right, so I guess 4, pretty close.
Okay. Mr. Kopitsky, you can take that down. I'd like to speak a little more about that Airbnb. Just to be clear, you and Jessica both drank at the Airbnb, right?
That's right. We had a glass or 2 of wine.
And then you drove to the bar together, right?
That's right.
All right. I'd like to finally talk to you about your deposition. Now, you could have been threatened to be sued in today's case, right?
That's what Jess's mom told me.
And then you testified on behalf of the plaintiff, didn't you?
That's right, but that's not why I'm here to testify.
And you were not ever sued for that, were you?
No, I'm here because my best friend died.
And that was after meeting with the plaintiff's attorneys who don't represent you, right?
That's right. They told me to tell the truth.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Ms. Keswani, do you have any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor.
All right, may this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, now, I understand you have no further witnesses. Are you resting at?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff rests.
All right, Mr. Stone, you may proceed. I understand you have a witness to call.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Mr. Sonny Mehta to the stand.
All right, Mr. Mehta, I understand that you have been constructively sworn and that you are prepared to proceed. Yes, Mr. Stone, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're welcome.
Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
My name is Sonny Mehta.
And what do you do, Mr. Mehta?
Well, I'm an entrepreneur. I just started a software company where I'm trying to revolutionize waiting in line at the zoos. It's gotten awfully long, and I have a background in entomology, so that's what I'm doing right now. But previously, I was a bar owner. So
I'd like to talk to you a little more about that bar. What was it called?
Sonny's Rooftop Bar.
And what was the experience of owning that like?
Well, I worked very hard at it, and I really enjoyed it. You know, I love getting to interact with people. It's what I love to do most.
And did you have to have any training or certification to run that bar?
Absolutely. Serving alcohol is a very serious issue. And we go through a certification process where we learn to look for certain signs of different things like obvious intoxication, because that's illegal to do, to serve someone who's obviously intoxicated. And we are taught that it's illegal to serve alcohol to minors and various things of the sort.
And Mr. Mehta, could you talk a little more about the training for detecting obvious intoxication? What does that entail?
Sure. Well, again, we look for the different signs that go into that. So slurred speech, red eyes, watery eyes, and not making sense, not being able to walk, losing control of your faculties, those sorts of things.
And Mr. Mehta, did you ever have to use this training while owning the bar to kick someone out?
Oh, absolutely. At least once a week.
And in your experience of owning the bar, did someone's weight always correlate to whether they displayed symptoms of obvious intoxication?
No, sir. Not always.
What about their height?
No, sir.
What about their gender?
No, sir. Again,
What
you
about
get a
how-
general indication, but it's not always accurate.
And what about how many drinks someone had?
Again, it gives you some indication, but it's not hard and tried method to determine how intoxicated someone is.
All right. I'd like to now move on to March 24th, 2019. How many people were at your bar that night?
Over the course of the night, about 20, but 10 to 12 at any given time, I would say.
And how many people were serving at the bar that night?
Just two, me and Frankfurt.
And what were you doing?
Well, Frankfurt, he typically makes the drinks, and I serve.
And would you recognize a picture of your bar?
Sure.
Let the record reflect we're now showing Exhibit 8 on the screen. Do you recognize this?
Yes, sir. That's the rooftop.
Is this a fair and accurate depiction of the rooftop of your bar?
Yes, sir, it is.
And if we could please show Exhibit 9 on the screen as well. Let the record reflect we're showing Exhibit 9. Do you recognize this?
Yes, sir. That's the downstairs portion where the actual bar itself is.
And is this a fair and accurate depiction?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, we now move to enter Exhibits 8 and 9 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
They will be entered.
Mr. Kopitsky, if you could please move back to Exhibit 8. Now, Mr. Mehta, where were you in the picture that night?
Well, I was all over the place. You see, I was serving every single person who was there that night their drinks. So not at any specific table at any given time.
And were you in any place for a very long period of time that night?
No, sir.
Were you on all sides of that big area in the center with the tree?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, please move to Exhibit 9, Mr. Kopitsky. Now, where were you? What is this?
Again, that's the bar downstairs. I was going up and down all night because I had to get the drinks downstairs from Frankfurt, and then I would go upstairs and serve.
So how often would you say you were down here?
About 50-50, I'd say.
So were you in any one place between these two floors for a very long time that night?
No, sir. Like I said, I was kind of just hopping around all over the place throughout the night.
All right, thank you. Mr. Kapitsi, you can take those down now. Now, Mr. Mehta, do you remember there being a Jessica Marks at your bar that night?
Yes, sir. I do.
And do you remember if she was there with anyone?
Yes, sir. She was there with a man named Morgan Levin.
And on average, and how many times did you say that you served Miss Marks that night?
I would say I probably served them around 4 to 5 times.
And how long were they at the bar that night?
I think just under 3 hours.
So with the 5 moments across 3 hours, how long would you say on average between times serving Miss Marks?
Well, I served them about 4 to 5 times in about 3 hours. So I would say around 45 minutes.
And I'd like to now talk to you a little more specifically about those interactions. Now, were you checking for obvious intoxication every time you served Miss Marks?
Yes, sir. As I do with every single customer I serve.
And across those 5 moments, did you notice anything from Miss Marks?
No, sir. I didn't see any signs of obvious intoxication or any indication that I shouldn't serve her.
What about her friend?
Not any signs of obvious intoxication necessarily, or any indications I needed to cut him off. But I did notice that her friend was a little buzzed.
And did you do anything to check on him?
I believe at one point I asked Jessica I told her I hoped that Morgan Levin wasn't driving, just because drinking and driving is never a good idea.
And did any interaction happen where Jessica stumbled into you?
No, sir.
Now, I'd just like to make it abundantly clear, Mr. Mehta, in your 5 interactions serving Jessica that night, did she display to you any symptoms of obvious intoxication?
No, sir.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, you may proceed with cross-examination, Ms. Keswani.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Mehta, can you see and hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, I want to ask you a few questions about your business before March 24th, 2019. A few months before Jessica and Morgan walked into your bar, you received a citation, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, pursuant to Rule 404B. May I be heard?
Yes.
Your Honor, opposing counsel is attempting to speak about a past instance of a crime or wrongdoing with a citation that we believe is attempting to show that they acted in accordance with that trait on the night of March 24th, which is inadmissible character evidence.
Your Honor, may I
All
ask?
right, Ms. Keswani, could you please respond?
This citation and any evidence about it has already been ruled on in an evidentiary ruling previous in a pretrial order. This is Exhibit 1 and has been pre-admitted today and can be used at any time throughout today's trial.
Your Honor, may I
All right.
respond briefly?
Yes.
Your Honor, we agree that the evidence has been pre-admitted, but we disagree with the usage of the document in this case today. We believe that specifically using it in order to indicate a past crime, wrongdoing, or other act is the same as in today's case, is inadmissible character evidence. We don't object to them using this document, but using it for this purpose is inadmissible.
Your Honor, may I ask?
Overruled. Proceed, Ms. Keswani.
Of course, Your Honor.
Let the record reflect my co-counsel is screen sharing that citation. Mr. Mehta, you received the citation for serving people who were underage. Isn't that right?
Me personally, no, ma'am.
But Sonny's Rooftop Bar, you pled guilty to serving people who were underage. Yes?
The bar did, yes.
Now, another bartender at that bar, Frankfurt Johnson, pled guilty to serving alcohol to people who were underage, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And Frankfurt Johnson, that's the same bartender that was there on the night of March 24th. Isn't that right, Mr. Mehta?
Yes, ma'am.
As a part of this citation, you also agreed to getting an ID scanner, correct?
Yes, ma'am, we did. And unfortunately, on the night in question, that ID scanner wasn't working.
But You agreed to scan anyone's ID who was under 35.
Actually under 45.
Here it says customers believed to be under 35 years of age. Isn't that right?
Yes, ma'am. That's what was required under the law, but we made it our personal rule to do 45.
And I want to talk about that personal rule. You agreed to check anyone's ID who was under 45. Yes?
Like I just said, yes.
And Jessica and Morgan, they looked under 45 that night. Isn't that correct?
Yes, ma'am. I thought so.
My co-counsel could screen share Exhibit 4. Mr. Mehta, you were shown this during your deposition, yes?
Yes, ma'am. I was.
You were shown this as Jessica Marks's fake ID.
They showed me this exhibit. Yes, ma'am.
And this is a fair and accurate representation of the exhibit you were shown?
It looks to be, sure.
Your Honor, permission to enter Exhibit 4 into evidence at this time?
Any objection, Mr. Stone?
Yes, Your Honor, pursuant to Rule 402, this case, it's already been pre-stipulated that Jessica was a minor pursuant to Stipulation 14. We believe that any testimony about her using a fake ID or being underage has no propensity or evidentiary purpose except for prejudice, and we believe under Rule 402 and 403 it's unadmissible.
Could you please respond, Ms. Keswani?
Yes, Your Honor. The probative value of this exhibit outweighs any prejudicial value that this has, because in today's case, Mr. Stone has brought an affirmative defense, and we have to, the jury has to decide liability in today's case. And this goes to decide exactly that, Your Honor. If Mr. Mehta was able to recognize this as a fake ID, it goes to show that either he saw this was a fake ID and chose to do nothing about it, or simply didn't check Jessica and Morgan Levin's ID that night, even with their policy that they check everyone's ID who was under 45.
The objection's overruled. Proceed.
Yes, Your Honor.
Your Honor, permission to enter this exhibit into evidence.
Granted.
Mr. Mehta, this exhibit, you recognize this fake ID, correct?
It looks fake to me, sure.
Your deposition, it only took you 2 seconds to realize this is a fake ID. Isn't that right?
Yes, ma'am, but there aren't even any holograms on it. But I can't tell you for sure. I mean,
In fact, you called it a bad fake ID, correct?
yes, ma'am. Believe me, I've seen my fair share of fake IDs, and this one is one of the worst ones.
Now, Mr. Levin, I want to talk about something that you mentioned on direct examination, the interactions that you had with Jessica. You mentioned that you interacted with Jessica just 5 times, correct?
Around 4 to 5, or that's how many times I served her. Interacted with her about 8 to 10.
Yeah, so that's correct. You interacted with her about 8 to 10 times, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
During this time, you mentioned that you were always looking out for signs of obvious intoxication, yes?
Correct.
You were able to observe her behavior from that night.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, you were here for the direct examination of Mr. Levin.
I was.
You saw that video that was played on Mr. Levin's direct examination, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And in that video, you say that Jessica could possibly be drunk, correct?
Yes, it's possible that she's drunk in the video. I personally have no idea. I would have to do a blood alcohol test on her in order to know for sure.
Now, I want to put that video on a timeline. Let the record reflect my co-counsel is screen sharing the timeline that was constructed on Morgan Levin's direct examination. Mr. Levin, or Mr. Mehta, you recognize this as the timeline that was constructed on Morgan Levin's direct examination, correct?
That looks like what y'all created.
I want to zoom in to the last part of that timeline. Now, you can see that in the last picture and in the picture taken, the freeze frame of the video, there are some key differences, correct?
I mean, the tables are not identical. No, ma'am.
The chips and guac are gone, yes?
Correct.
That glass of wine, it isn't there anymore, yes?
Yes, ma'am.
A few things have been moved around, yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Mehta, you were the only one clearing tables that night?
Yes, ma'am.
You were the only one clearing tables on the rooftop that night?
In the entire restaurant. Yes, ma'am.
meaning that you must have cleared Jessica and Morgan Levin's table within 20 minutes of when that video was taken. Isn't that correct?
If those times are accurate, I'm sure I did. Yes, ma'am.
Now, Mr. Mehta, you claim that you never saw that Jessica was intoxicated, but I want to talk about something that's a little less subjective. Jessica's blood alcohol level. You're aware that Jessica's blood alcohol level was 0.16 that night, yes?
When she crashed, yes, ma'am.
Now, I want to set a baseline. The blood alcohol level for an adult, the legal limit to drink and drive is 0.08, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Meaning that Jessica's blood alcohol level, it was 2 times that of an adult, yes?
To operate a motor vehicle, yes, ma'am.
Now, the blood alcohol level, the legal limit for a minor is 0.01, correct?
Yes, ma'am. And again, I thought she was 23 at the time.
And the blood alcohol level, so Jessica's blood alcohol level was 0.16 times the acceptable blood alcohol level for a minor. Isn't that correct?
No, ma'am. It was 16 times.
My apologies. It was 16 times the acceptable level for a minor.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Keswani. Mr. Stone, do you have any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor, briefly.
All right.
Mr. Mehta, in your 5 moments where you served Jessica, were you checking for obvious intoxication in each of those interactions separately?
Yes, sir.
Did you see a video being recorded in any of those 5 interactions?
No, sir.
And was Jessica acting obviously intoxicated in any of those 5 moments where you served her?
No, sir.
No further questions, Your Honor.
And Ms. Keswani, based on those few questions, do you have any recross?
No recross, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Mr. Stone, do you have any further witnesses or evidence at this time?
No, Your Honor, the defense rests their case in chief.
All right, with having the plaintiff and defense having rested, we will now proceed to closing arguments. I think we will take just about 2 minutes to allow the scoring judges to do some scoring at this time so that we have all of, except of course the closing. All right, let's proceed with closing argument. Ms. Keswani, you may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Before I begin, may I ask to reserve any remaining time for rebuttal?
Yes.
Members of the jury, despite the signs, they continued to serve alcohol. Today, we learned about the tragic death of Jessica Marks, about how after being served drink after drink after drink at the defendant's bar, her car swerved and fell into a ravine, and she died. Members of the jury, today as a plaintiff, we held what's known as the burden of proof. We had to prove to you by a preponderance of evidence, meaning more likely than not, Sonny's rooftop bar is liable for Jessica's death. We're suing Sonny's rooftop bar under the California Dram Shop Act. That act states that if a reasonable person can see that someone is obviously intoxicated and the bar continues to serve them, then they're liable. And we satisfied that burden in today's case because members of the jury, they kept serving despite the signs. I want to go back through those 3 main pieces of evidence I asked you to keep in mind throughout today's trial. 1, how many times did Jessica Marks and Sunny's rooftop bar interact? 2, how was Jessica behaving that night? And 3, how did Sunny's rooftop bar react to Jessica's behavior? I want to go through those one by one. 1, how many times did Jessica Marks and Sunny's rooftop bar interact? Members of the jury, today you heard from both sides that they interacted 8 to 10 times. Mr. Mehta told you that he only served Jessica 5 times. There was other interactions. There were interactions when he was cleaning the table, taking away their drinks, talking to Jessica. I want to put those drinks that Jessica was served that night back up on the screen. Now, from this, you can see all of the drinks that Jessica was served. That wine, those 2 seltzers, that other seltzer, and the green tea shot. Every time she was served, you heard today that Jessica talked to Mr. Mehta. 2, how was Jessica behaving that night? Members of the jury, you saw the video that was played in court today. You saw Jessica's behavior, how she was loud, slurring her words. She wasn't making sense. You saw that today. You also heard from Mr. Levin, Jessica's best friend, that Jessica, she was acting drunk that night, that she was obviously intoxicated. And 3, how did Sunny's rooftop bar react to Jessica's behavior? Members of the jury, today you heard that they did nothing. You heard Mr. Levin say that after saying, "We need to cut this one off," they continued to serve Jessica alcohol. They never cut her off. Now, members of the jury, at the beginning of today's trial, Mr. Stone told you that we would bring you no evidence. There would be no evidence that Mr. Mehta ever saw how Jessica was acting that night. But I want to put that timeline back up on the screen, the timeline with the pictures and the video. And you can see from this timeline that those drinks, they're changing throughout the night. Mr. Mehta was serving the drinks, taking the drinks, cleaning the drinks. But that last part of that timeline, you can see from those pictures that chips and guac, they're missing. That bottle, that glass of wine, it's gone, and a lot of things have been moved around. Now, the only way that those things were moved around and the only person that was clearing tables that night was Mr. Mehta. He was the only one that was taking drinks away. He told you that he must have been there at their table within 20 minutes of seeing when that video was taken. And you also heard Jessica's blood alcohol level today, 0.16. Now, members of the jury, I want to ask you what's more likely. That someone with a minor with a blood alcohol level of 0.16 simply wasn't displaying any symptoms of intoxication, or that Sunny's rooftop bar chose to ignore those symptoms. You heard today that her blood alcohol level was 16 times that for the legal limit of an adult as a minor. Members of the jury, you also heard Sunny Mehta tell you about the fake IDs. It only would have taken him 2 seconds to identify that those IDs were fake. Now, members of the jury, either he checked those IDs and chose to ignore that Jessica and Morgan were minors, or he never checked them at all. That's why I'm going to ask you to come to the only possible conclusion based on all of the evidence that we've heard in today's case. That Sunny's rooftop bar is liable. Because despite the signs, they continued to serve alcohol. Thank you.
Unmute. Thank you, Ms. Keswani. Let's proceed with the closing argument by the defense. Please go ahead, Mr. Stone.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, members of the jury, may it please the court, my name is Owen Stone and I represent the defendant Sunny's Rooftop Bar in today's case. Now, the plaintiff just stood up and gave you a lot of arguments. I wrote a few of them down because they said that a reasonable person can see someone obviously intoxicated and the bar kept serving, it's their responsibility. Well, members of the jury, I showed you the law at the beginning of today's case, and you know that's not quite accurate. Because it only matters when the bar was serving Jessica Marks. The plaintiff also pointed out that in addition to serving her, there were other interactions that night. Once again, members of the jury, the law is when defendant served Jessica Marks. The plaintiff had one burden today to prove in those 5 moments when defendant served Jessica Marks that she was displaying symptoms of obvious intoxication. Members of the jury, they have brought no specific evidence. We know this because Mr. Levin himself told you that he has 0 specific recollection of what Jessica was saying, doing, sounding like, talking about that time. She could have been on her phone. She could have been in the bathroom. She could have been doing a wide variety of things. She could have said thank you to Mr. Mehta. She could have just been talking to Morgan. But absent evidence from the plaintiff, we don't know. And if the plaintiff hasn't offered any evidence, if they haven't offered any proof as to what Jessica was doing, then they can't meet their burden of proof because they haven't shown what was happening at that time. Here's what we do know happened in those 5 moments. We know that Mr. Sunny Mehta interacted with Jessica in those short interactions, those 30 seconds to maybe a minute interactions. We know that he checked for symptoms of obvious intoxication, and we know that he's trained to check for those symptoms. Members of the jury, part of the plaintiff's story doesn't add up because they claim that Sunny let Jessica stay knowing she was obviously intoxicated, or how obvious it was that she was intoxicated. But members of the jury, you remember Mr. Mehta himself saying that he kicked people out once a week while he owned that bar. Why would he let someone stay in his bar, a massive liability risk, if he kicked people out once a week for showing symptoms of obvious intoxication? It just doesn't make sense unless that's not what happened. Unless the defendant didn't kick Jessica out because she wasn't showing symptoms. Because in those 5 moments when he served her, she wasn't showing symptoms. She was doing a wide variety of other things. Again, the plaintiff hasn't shown what she was doing. They can't show what she was doing. They've offered no evidence as to what she was doing. Now remember, my witness is trained in this. My witness is kicked people out once a week, and my witness told you specifically that people's body types, people's genders, how many drinks they even had is not always a clear sign. Let's compare that with the testimony of the plaintiff's witness, Mr. Morgan Levin. Because whether Mr. Morgan Levin lied on purpose or whether it was an unintentional, it doesn't matter because Mr. Levin's testimony today was unreliable. Let's start with the video that the plaintiff has continued to show you. Where they claim that the timeline doesn't add up, that the only way the drinks moved around is if this defendant cleaned them up. But members of the jury, you saw the pictures. You saw that there's another much more obvious way that video doesn't make sense. Well, and that's the fact that the video was recorded an hour earlier than Mr. Levin claims. Again, it may have been unintentional. It may be that he doesn't remember what happened that night, or he may be purposefully lying. But the truth is that video was recorded an hour earlier, an hour less of drinks. Mr. Levin was unreliable in that case. And that's not all, because you also heard that Mr. Levin lied to the police today. He lied to the police by telling them that he and Jessica had not had any drinks. He then amended his statement. Like he said, he tried to tell the truth. But once again, that wasn't the truth because he said that Jessica had, 3 drinks. You saw that Jessica had more than 3 drinks that night. The plaintiff, today's case, had 2 witnesses to ask questions to. They only had to prove 5 moments and they brought 0 specific evidence. The only general evidence they brought was from Mr. Levin himself, which I will remind you again was an unreliable narrator. Now, members of the jury, that's not the only thing we've brought today. Because in addition to the 5 moments that the plaintiff has failed to prove, we also brought forward an affirmative defense of comparative negligence. Now, we understand how difficult it is to discuss the actions that someone took that led to their own death. We'd like to reiterate to the jury that what happened in today's case was a tragedy and that Jessica didn't deserve to lose her life. But what the law says is that Jessica was negligent. And to be perfectly clear, I'd like to show you the legal definition of negligence that you'll be read at the end of today's case, because negligence is the failure to use reasonable care to prevent harm to oneself. I'd like to take you through 5 choices that Jessica made that night, which demonstrate a failure to use reasonable care. First, she chose to drink before she even left for the bar. You heard Ms. Levin say that they both drink at the Airbnb. Jessica planned to drink that night a lot. She planned to get drunk. And how do you get drunk? Well, you start early. You start before you leave. Second, Jessica drove her car to the bar with the knowledge that she would have to take it back. Every drink she had at the bar that night, she had with the knowledge that she would have to take it back. 3, she used a fake ID. She circumvented the law in order to get into the bar, obtaining illegal substances for her age. 4, she was offered a chance at an Uber and chose not to take it. One final chance. And 5, she chose to get back behind the wheel again. Members of the jury, our burden was to prove that these choices were negligent by a preponderance of the evidence, and looking at them, it is clear. These choices were negligent. They are what led to her death. And as tragic as it is to say, Jessica's choices contributed to her death. So we believe that these 5 choices, in addition to the 5 moments that the plaintiff failed to prove today, means you must find the defendant not liable for wrongful death. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. Ms. Keswani, do you have any time remaining to make a rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor, I have 2 minutes remaining.
All right, please proceed.
Members of the jury, Mr. Stone just got up here and told you this case is about the 5 moments. The 5 moments that Jessica and Mr. Mehta interacted. Members of the jury, it's about more than that. It's about when Mr. Mehta failed to check Jessica and Morgan's ID. It's about when Mr. Mehta chose to ignore the signs of obvious intoxication. And it's about when the bartenders at Sunny's bar chose to never cut Jessica off. I want to go through those one by one. Members of the jury, today you heard in trial that it only took 2 seconds for Mr. Mehta to recognize that Jessica's ID was a fake. So either he looked at it and chose to ignore that it was a fake ID, or he never checked it at all. The 2, that Mr. Mehta chose to ignore the signs. Now, Mr. Stone just got up here and told you that that timeline was wrong. That video was taken an hour before when Mr. Levin claimed it was. I want you to think about that. If it was taken an hour before when Mr. Levin claimed it was, that's an hour more of time for Mr. Mehta to view Jessica's behavior, an hour more of time to see how Jessica was behaving that night. And 3, when Sunny's rooftop bar chose to not cut off Jessica. Members of the jury, today you heard that Sunny and bartenders at Sunny's rooftop bar said, we need to cut this one off. We can't serve her more alcohol. And now Mr. Stone talked about Jessica's decisions that night. But what about Mr. Mehta's decisions? What about his decisions to not cut her off? That's why I'm going to ask you to come to the only possible conclusion. That the defendant, they're guilty, they're liable in today's trial. Because they kept serving despite the signs. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Now at this time, since the closing arguments and the evidence has concluded, let's have our judges proceed to fill out the ballots and submit them, and then we will take just a moment or 2 to make a few comments and introduce ourselves.